Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Joe Tossi from TechTables.com, and you're listening to the Public Sector Show by TechTables. This podcast features human-centric stories from public sector CIOs, CISOs, and technology leaders across federal, state, city, county, and higher education. You'll gain valuable insights into current issues and challenges faced by top leaders. Through interviews, speaking engagements, live podcast tour events, we offer you a behind-the-mic look at the opportunities top leaders are seeing today. And to make sure you never miss an episode, head over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and hit that follow button and leave a quick rating. Just tap the number of stars that you think this show deserves. Today, I'm super excited to introduce Lindsey Pollak, New York Times bestselling author, international speaker, and often described as generational translator. She's the author of 4 career and workplace advice books: The Remix, How to Lead and Succeed in the Multigenerational Workplace. Her speaking audiences and consulting clients have included more than 300 of the top corporations, law firms, universities, nonprofits, and government agencies, like this one here with the city of Seattle. Her insights have appeared across media outlets, including The Today Show, Wall Street Journal, and CNBC. Lindsey is a graduate of Yale University, proud member of Generation X. Lindsey, welcome to the Public Sector Show by TechTables.
I'm so happy to be here.
For those who are not familiar, we know you're giving the keynote tomorrow, but for those who are not familiar with your work, give us a quick intro and maybe a little bit of the origin story.
Yeah, I'd love to, because I think it really speaks to why I care so much about this topic, and I think why a lot of people enter city government as well. There's some reason that you do, and for me, I really struggled to figure out my first job out of college. I went to Yale. I thought, okay, this is going to be easy, and it wasn't, and I was slapped in the face with that. And so I ended up starting a blog, as you did in the late 1990s, and writing a book called Getting from College to Career about how I figured out how to succeed in the workplace. And I thought that was going to be my career. For 10 years, I traveled to college campuses. I spoke to students about getting jobs. I did media interviews and wrote on that topic. And in 2008, the word millennial just exploded into the media. And out of the blue, I got a phone call from a company that said, Lindsey, we hear you speak to college students about their careers, millennials. And I said, I do. And they said, is it true that you understand them? I said, yeah, I think I do. And they said, can you help us with that? And so I was the first documented millennial career expert helping companies understand millennials in the workplace. And I did that for a long time. And then what started to happen is I myself am a Gen Xer. I started getting older. Millennials started getting older. And people in my audiences said, what about everybody else? It doesn't really make sense to focus on one group of people when you have young people coming in all the time. And that was the big aha moment, that it is a multi-generational workplace. It's always been a multi-generational workplace, and it will continue to be, and that we all need to build skills to get along with people of all generations. And it just so happens we are the most multi-generational workplace in history right now. And I think city governments are experiencing that along with so many other industries. And my passion is to make young people feel included, but everybody else too.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm in a very unique position where I married a little bit of an older woman. Hopefully she doesn't watch this and kill me, but look, she is a Gen Xer. I'm a millennial. We often talk about this. I also have a 15-year-old daughter, a 6-year-old son, and I also coach high school basketball. And then I travel around the country. So I meet with everybody. I got everyone dialed in across the spectrum. So I was actually very excited about this when I saw your notes, your website, the multi-generational, the entire thing. So let's jump into your book, The Remix. And now I'm gonna cop. I didn't have time to read it. I really wanted to, but I did look at the most popular highlights from Kindle, and I did go to YouTube. I did watch 30 minutes of your talk. It's fantastic. I'm hoping to make it tomorrow morning. I have a breakfast at 8 a.m., but I'm gonna try and see if I can get here by 9:15, not too late. But I did take the transcripts from YouTube, which you can do. I'm giving all these secrets away, but you take the transcripts from YouTube and actually put them into ChatGPT, and then I can just ask questions that I'm looking for, very specific answers about Lindsey. Pretty crazy, right?
I love it.
Yeah,
I love
how
it.
fast you can prepare for a podcast. So before the old days, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, I actually I would watch a lot of these. Your book, The Remix, is what I got excited about. And you talk about combining the classic workplace practices with modern approaches. Walk us through some of the specific examples of how organizations can effectively blend the old and the new elements to create a more inclusive and productive multi-generational workforce.
ChatGPT. Joe.
Yeah.
Thank you for your secrets. I love that you framed it as a family issue because we're all experts on this topic because we're all from multi-generational families. We get how to do this, and we get that we often have a lot in common with our families, but a lot that's different because we are born and come of age at different times. And so the title of the remix is really about what you said, which is based on a remix song, and music is very generational, that when you have a remix song, you take a classic song and you don't say, wow, that classic should go away. You say, that's a great song, but there's so much more we can do with it now. So you combine the old and the new. So an example of that is an architect I worked with who learned how to design buildings with a pencil and a paper. He's a baby boomer. And now, of course, he uses CAD design software and AI, but he still makes sure that the students and the mentees that he works with learn how to use a pencil and paper, because there are moments when that's really effective, and there are moments when you want to use all the technology in the world. I worked with a nonprofit that was having a fundraiser, and they said, should we have a cool, hip cocktail party for the young people or a sit-down dinner for the older people? And they said, wait a minute, a lot of young people want to go to a sit-down dinner. A lot of older people want to go to a cocktail party. We shouldn't judge what people might want based on their age, and why don't we have both? So it's not about choosing one or the other. It's about finding the mixes where you're able to give people options and surprise themselves. One of my favorite stories, I worked with a startup, and they were super casual millennial startup, all wearing jeans and sweatshirts and hoodies and the typical stuff.
It's Viore now, by the way.
Oh, Viore,
Yeah.
sorry, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
And they had Fancy Friday because they thought, oh, we've never worn jackets and ties to work. Wouldn't that be fun? So that was a remix for them. You never know what could be something different that can spark ideas or spark connection.
So in your book, you encourage organizations to question their practices, both old and new. You ask, and I like this, what are we doing because it's always been done that way that we need to stop, continue, or start doing in entirely new ways? Walk us through this process of evaluation and give us a few examples of practices that you have been using with your clients.
In the old days, your boss or your organization would say jump, and the employees would say how high. And now, when you say jump, millennials and Zs say why. And I think why is such an incredibly powerful question. For example, if you have always waited 4 years to promote somebody to vice president, well, why? What if they're ready sooner? Oh yeah, we've always done it that way. Why? I don't really remember. If somebody is a rock star, shouldn't they get promoted sooner? Yeah, I guess they should. So it's questioning the unwritten rules of why things have been done and saying, does that still make sense? And sometimes, to be fair, it does make sense and you have a really good reason. And sometimes it doesn't. I think we're seeing this in the post-COVID environment where people are saying, why do we go to the office 5 days a week from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and sit in cubicles? Do we really need to do that anymore? And sometimes there are reasons that we do, and sometimes there are reasons that we don't. So it's really that questioning. And again, it's not saying, get rid of everything we used to do and replace it with the new. It's just about asking the question to see what we should keep, what we should maybe alter, and what maybe needs to go. Asking the question is just the first step. And I was asking why a long time ago when I would work at a software company, and it was the same thing with like annual reviews, right? We're only gonna assess your performance once a year. And I was like, why, right? That sounds really silly. And then of course, over time, that started to change a little bit, but it's still like a silly practice to assess someone every 12 months when, you know, if they're a rock star, that they easily can get promoted if they're performing much better. So I really liked that insight. You also noted that while the fundamental workplace desires remain consistent across the generations, the ways the needs are expressed and expectations around them have evolved. You also emphasize the importance of recognizing individual onlyness within generational groups. How can leaders balance addressing the generational trends while still honoring the unique experiences and perspectives of each employee? This goes, I think, to a fundamental rule, which is just don't make assumptions. Oh, Joe, you told me you're a millennial. You must want to tweet me, and you must not want to do this in person because you're young. And you might say, no, actually, I really enjoy sitting down and talking in person. Or you might meet somebody who absolutely adheres to every millennial stereotype on earth and eats avocado toast while they're texting 19 people, right? You just don't know. And so you have to ask the question and say, how would you like to connect? What do you do for fun? What would make you feel included at this company? So I think you have to balance asking people for their input And knowing that if you make huge assumptions about a group of people, you might get them wrong. And so just asking the question is so powerful. I'll give you an example. I worked with a hospital and they had an employee of the month. And they said, do you think the young people like the employee of the month program? And I said, well, you tell me, employees of all generations, what do they do when they're named employee of the month? And they said, oh, it's so funny. Like half of the people throw a party and they take lots of photographs and they invite their family and they celebrate it. The other half of the people like don't show up on the day that they're supposed to get their award. And I said, maybe they're not really enjoying that. And you could give people a choice that they could be named employee of the month, they could get a day off, or they could win a gift card or something like that. It sounds simple the way I'm saying it, and the reality is it is, but we don't realize how often we make assumptions based on people's generations or anything else about them.
And then just taking the time one-on-one to get to know the person and just tell me more about yourself. I even do this with my daughter. She makes fun of me now, but I've done it for years where she would come home from school and I would be like, hey, tell me how school was. And she would say, great. And then she would sit there and just look at me and I'm like, okay, cool, but what else? It was great, but why? And when she was younger, it was like, we get to play on the playground today. Great, what did you love about the playground? So the classic 5 whys, right? And just running through this, and then you finally get to the red ball on the playground, on a Tuesday where the sun is out, is like why she had such a great day, right? Now she's 15, she makes fun of me because it's not the playground and the red ball anymore. I'm like, I know that, but I love that story. So same thing with adults, just getting at what do they really care about? Why do they care about it? And then when they tell you, something, and then just picking up on little details like, I love coffee. And so, but not everyone loves coffee. I got a buddy, he loves tea. I don't know why, but hey, he loves tea. I make sure that when we get together as friends that in the morning, there's a place that has the tea that he likes. I'm just trying to be intentional, right? And I only drink one coffee handlebar, in Santa Barbara. But those are the type of things where even bringing that into the workplace, and I have my assistant, she just got married, and what do you want off your wedding registry? Just like little things, you might not be able to always do that, but just diving into figuring out what do people care about? And then from there, it allows you to be really insightful and caring. And I think that's how you really end up bridging the gap.
If you take that a step further, think about career pathing. We tend to assume that people want the next job that we think they should want. And what happens is people leave and we have an exit interview and say, why are you leaving? I had such big plans for you. And they say, but that's not what I wanted for myself. So if you just ask the question, what skills do you want to learn? What job do you want next? Sometimes it's not what we think they should want or what we would have wanted when we were in their shoes, but you can actually keep talent of all different ages. Like you might have somebody who's 63 years old and you think, oh, you must want to retire and slow down. And they're like, no, I've never worked harder and I'm really happy and I want to move forward. And you lose that talent because you never have the conversation.
Yeah. Something I've been doing with my assistant, she lives in Indiana, Riley, and she's great, is we'll have our weekly one-on-one. And it's just so important because a lot of folks don't actually have the one-on-one, but it's so critical just for alignment. But one of the things I had a friend suggest to me was pointing out the core values that we have and each week pointing out in each other where we saw that core value. And I was like, oh, it's so good. So I started doing this with Riley. And I thought it's such a great example of reinforcing the culture and also keeping that person there for the long time, because then you get into the whole thing of turnover and churn, and it's just so expensive hiring new people and finding good people. You should just take care of the people you have, and then you don't have that problem, right?
When people say to me, I don't have time to do any of this, Lindsey, all of your tips and advice on multi-generational management, I don't have time. And I say, okay, here's my number one tip of any employee of any generation. In your next one-on-one, let the employee talk first. Just let them say what they have to say before you immediately make assumptions about what they want. So sometimes it's those small tweaks that make a huge difference.
Yeah, I know, I love that. So in your book, you outline the 8 rules for remixers. You don't have to tell us the 8 because we'll have them go buy the book on Amazon, link in the show notes, to help navigate the multi-generational workplace. One rule that stands out is the think and or not. You mentioned this earlier, because a one size does not fit all. Technically, you said one size fits none. Walk us through this concept and share some practical examples of how leaders can implement an and approach and when faced with generational differences in work styles or preferences.
So the tip is think and, not or. And what it means is instead of saying, should we have the cocktail party or the sit-down dinner, what if we had both? Should we have elder care for our employees who have elderly parents, or should we have childcare? Have both, and have pet insurance or pet care as well. It's about expanding the pie, not infinitely, like everybody gets whatever they want, which I think is what people's fear is, but saying when you have people of different generations, they might have different needs. Or you might find that somebody changes their needs over time, right? I wanted to say one size fits one. And then I thought, but even one size might not fit me next week, whereas it fits me today. So it really doesn't work over time. And again, it's not about unlimited. I'm not a fan of unlimited vacation. I'm a fan of vacation time that's open, but with some boundaries where you say, here's the average that an employee might take, right? So you're giving people options rather than either or. A lot of companies get rid of stuff that's really popular because they think it's not going to meet everybody's needs. Instead, I'd rather you offer a couple of options for employee benefits, for activities to do, for team bonding. We say, oh, not everybody wants to go to a cooking class, so we'll just have kickball. Why not have both and let people have a choice between the two?
You also highlighted a fascinating mismatch of expectations between how HR professionals and millennials define loyalty in the workplace. You probably fill in Gen Z there too.
Yeah.
Given that job tenure has actually decreased across all age groups, not just among young workers, how can organizations reframe their approach to employee loyalty and retention?
Loyalty is such a loaded word when we have the generational conversation because, and I'm going to stereotype a little bit here, most people who are older Gen Xers or baby boomers or older, so let's say people in their mid-40s and older, were taught, or when we started in the workplace, the message was you stay with a company and that is loyalty. And what started to happen in the 1980s is a lot of companies did layoffs, and we see this over and over again. And I think we're really affected by what happens to our parents in the workplace. And a lot of millennials and Gen Zs tell me, I saw a parent get laid off from a company that they were, quote, loyal to, and I will never let that happen to me. So a lot of millennials and Gen Z say two things. One is I'm loyal to a company while I'm there. You're paying me a salary, I'm doing the job. That is my loyalty to do the job I've been asked to do, but that doesn't imply that I'm going to stay forever. And the second thing they say a lot, which I think is a really good message for individual managers who care deeply like you do about your assistant, is they say, I might not be loyal to this company or to this municipal government, but I'm loyal to Joe because he's been a good mentor to me. And so I will have an open relationship with him and be honest about what I want. So it's not to a company or to an employer, it's to individuals who really care about you. So I think that bond between a leader and an employee is probably more important than ever. And millennials and Gen Zs really value someone who cares about you.
Yeah, I care about my camera guy right here, Tim, a lot too. Yeah, I really like Tim. He travels with me around too. Yeah, we love to have fun on the podcast.
He's doing a great job.
Yeah.
So what's your generation?
Yeah.
You're on the cusp. We call you a Zennial. You're a cusp between millennial and Gen X. So you could fit right between us. Oregon Trail generation, or I've heard geriatric millennial would be the other saying. It's my official diagnosis. Oregon Trail, for those who don't know, being the video game that most people in Tim's age range played, which was on a PC pressing two buttons. So it wasn't exactly Fortnite, but it was fun. So I hear.
My wife loved the Oregon Trail game.
You have 4 generations in your home.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I love that.
We've got it all going. So in your book, you said, what exactly defined a high scoring boss at Google? The number one quality in their research determined in 2008, and again, when they revisited the research in 2018, is that the manager is a good coach. Okay, so I want to pause. So I love that you mentioned this because there's a couple of things. One is, as an entrepreneur, Google is famous for a number of practices. It wasn't mentioned in the book, but one is their OKR, which is there's like a killer hour-long talk. I'm sure you've probably seen that. But going on, you said Google defined being a coach as taking such actions as providing timely and specific feedback, holding regular one-on-one meetings, listening, meeting individual communication needs, and being aware of your own mindset and that of your employee. Immediately, I thought of this book, The $1 Trillion Coach. Have you read it?
No, but when you mentioned it, I really want to read it now.
It's so good. Okay, so this is a leadership playbook of Silicon Valley's Bill Campbell. I'll save, for time, I'll just save it, but basically the leadership principles, this guy, Bill Campbell, played a pivotal role in mentoring and guiding some of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs and companies. Think Eric Schmidt at Google, and just there are a number. Anyways, offers this blueprint for forward-thinking business leaders to create high-performing cultures and teams. There's another great one that Netflix put out too. So there's just so many of these really great ones. But the question I had for you was, given the enduring importance of coaching in effective leadership, as highlighted by Google, some of the other companies out there, how can leaders in today's multi-generational workplace adapt these timeless coaching principles to meet the diverse needs and expectations of different generations?
I'm so glad you asked this, because I think sometimes people frame the question to me of like, how do I manage Gen Z, and how do I manage millennials, and how do I manage X, and how do I manage boomers? And I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is, how do you become a manager with a multi-generational mindset? And I think it's the same as having an inclusive mindset or a diversity focus, which is, I need to treat everybody as an individual, but you also only have so many hours in the day. And I think coaching is the umbrella answer to that. And the study that I referred to is called Project Oxygen. And Google did the study in 2008. They replicated it in 2018. I hope they do it again post-COVID. But they wanted to measure with data, as Google does, what actually makes somebody a good manager. And I feel, and this is now in my head, this is not the official study, they found out what they didn't want, which was, it's not really about your skill at doing your job, right? Being a good engineer or being a good technical specialist actually ranked last in whether people want to work for you. What ranked first is, does my boss care about me and my development? So that's the coaching mentality, which is, I want you to be the best that you can be, not the best that I want you to be exactly like. Treating people like individuals, I think being very clear on the outcome. A coach wants you to win, but they want you to win in a way that makes sense for you. And I just watched the US Open tennis, so I was thinking about this a lot during that. It's different with a team sport, but with an individual sport, you have to coach a person in a way that they're going to respond to. And the generational piece is, other people might not want to be managed the way you wanted to be managed. And you see this a lot in sports with older managers and coaches and younger players, where a lot of the older coaches got yelled at a lot when they were playing sports. I'm thinking of football and some other sports like that. And the younger players are just not responding to that. And if you want your players to win, you have to coach them in a way that they are going to respond to, even if it's not what you did. And I think the hardest thing, and I say this as a Gen Xer, I was yelled at a lot when I started out. There was a very disciplinary command and control approach. So I have to remember that my job as a manager is not to get revenge on how I was coached and finally have my time, but to say that's not effective with this younger generation. They're used to a different style of coaching. And I think that works across the board. Some people do respond to the discipline. Some people do respond to being yelled at and others don't. So if you want to manage across generations, you have to think, how do I make each person on my team win? And what's the best approach to do that? Does that align with what you were thinking?
Oh yeah. So I coach high school basketball.
Okay.
And when I'm on the floor, it's talk about mismatch of expectations. There are the kids who are typically the starting 5, maybe 6, 7, who, when the gym is loud and your voice just naturally is gonna go up, you're basically yelling, especially when you're on the road. And so you have that, but then you have the parents who are like, hey, my baby. But then going from that gym and then going into my house, there's a transition from being the coach to like being the husband or dad. And so it's really funny, because even if my words are nice, I'll still be like, Annabelle. And she's, oh, you got that coach voice thing going on. I'm like, oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Left the gym. But there's that funny dynamic that you have to have different modes to be able to pull on and just to be able to communicate really at the end. And I was probably the last generation where I get fired up. If you were going to yell at me, like, I need this to go, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm amped, let's do this. And so that's just the athlete in me, right?
Sure.
But not everyone responds that way, and there are athletes who don't respond that way.
I'm in tears just thinking about it.
Yeah, this is my wife.
That doesn't work for me.
This is my wife. She's just terrified. I do not do that. I'm like, yeah, that's why I don't get hyped up on you. But it's like having that awareness And even for some of even just within the teams, varsity is so different than JV, so different than Frosh Soft. And Frosh Soft, you gotta be a little gentler. And JV is kind of where you get hey, my purpose is to prepare you for varsity. So it's a little harder. And then varsity is you wanna win.
It's a good message too for a younger manager of an older employee. I get that question a lot. You could be 20, 30 years younger than somebody that you're managing in the workplace today. That didn't used to happen. So I think the coaching message is great for that, which is if you show the older employee that you want them to win, you're setting the outcome of what you want, and then you let them do it in their own way. And that's the advice I find myself giving most to a younger manager of an older employee as well, coaching.
So curious, that one of the big themes and topics that we've been having to address here on these podcasts is the return to work. Mayor Harrell issued a 3-day return to work. This has brought up some significant challenges. Love just to actually clip this for the city of Seattle, but what advice would you give to HR teams and the other team leaders out there around this return to work, having those type of conversations, those uncomfortable conversations?
So first of all, we have been through a trauma. COVID was a big deal, and people handled it in different ways. People had different situations coming in and out of COVID. I think it's going to take a full decade to sort through what happened and the ramifications of that in the workplace. So I think even though it's 2024 going on 2025, we are still very much in this. So I just want to put that out there, that it doesn't just change overnight. It's over, everybody back to the way things were. The second is I think we had a lot of false starts. And so people thought, oh, now it's 4 days a week, now it's 3 days a week, now it's 2 days a week, now it's 5 days a week. And so that sort of messed things up a lot. And there are no rules about this. We've never done it before. So we can't say, oh, we know exactly what is going to work. I think the answer that's most important, and I should also say there are no correlations between generation and whether they want to be in an office or not. It's much more correlated to life stage. Do you have children or people you need to take care of at home? It's correlated to job function. What do you actually do all day? It's correlated to introvert versus extrovert. There's so many other factors. So I don't think it's helpful to say one generation wants to be in the office. But the most important piece is clarity. It's saying, here's the policy, for example, 3 days a week, and here is why. That is our policy, and this is the outcome we want from those 3 days a week. And we're going to be really deliberate about what happens when we are together in the office and what happens when we are not together. What I'm seeing a lot is policies like, we're 3 days a week in the office, but if you really cared, you'd come in 5. And that's not fair. We have all these unwritten rules and judgments, and the people who say, I don't want to be in with other people, and so on and so forth. So I think the clearer we can be about the exact policy, we have to stick to it and be deliberate when we are in person so that we're not all sitting in our offices on Zoom calls all day anyway, even though we're in person. That's what we have to have around it. And I think a lot of people were so focused on the number of days and not really focused on the why. And that's how I think you bring people on board, is giving them a reason why we want to be together for this amount of time. And it is not going to be easy because we've never done this before, but I think that's a really good starting place. I'll also say that statistics have shown that even if people's employer has a return to office policy that they don't like, they are still willing to go with it if it's clear. It's the lack of certainty and not being sure what success looks like that's really going to get people to be unhappy. So clarity is the most important piece.
It's like the unlimited vacation. You got to define what's unlimited, because
I think unlimited is unfair, and I think lack of clarity is unfair. Brene Brown says clear is kind. And I think sometimes we've been vague because we think it's nicer and more open, and I disagree. I think clarity is fair.
Yeah, no, need the clarity. The closest, like the pandemic, the closest to that, as far as like lasting trauma that I've seen, it's probably got to be at least the most recent, like the 2007, 2008 financial crisis, which obviously we lived through that. But so living through that, you can see just the scars that it left on people for a decade almost.
I've had people say to me who graduated college in 2008, 2009, they feel like they are their own distinct generation because of the experience of coming out of school and having to partake in that. I think it's really hard to be in that specific moment. I have a cousin who was class of 2020, and she said, I just feel like some people never launched because they had that very unique situation. I also went back and looked at people coming out of wartime in certain countries, and it can take a good decade for people to feel like they're back to, quote, whatever normal looks like. And I think we're really seeing that.
When you're curious, I'm really curious around your thoughts around burnout and being in the workplace today. Seems like it's tough for people to unplug, really tough. Advice for employers and employees just around setting boundaries and trying to unplug so that you can really create your most exceptional work while you're there.
I think one of the best things that millennials and Gen Z have brought to the workplace is less stigma about mental health and burnout. People always say, oh, these young people, they have so many feelings. And I always say, I had feelings too. I just had no idea I was allowed to talk about them in the workplace. I would hide in the bathroom and cry, right? So I think the fact that younger workers have brought the willingness to talk about these issues to the forefront is huge. And I think companies realized during COVID that rightly they had to think about mental health, they had to think about burnout, they had to think about all these factors, because when I wanted to work from home, I couldn't when I first started out because we didn't have devices to do that. And now you could theoretically work 24 hours a day. One of the biggest questions I used to get, I did a lot of webinars when the pandemic started, is people would write in, particularly young people who didn't have a lot of work experience, and they would say, what time am I allowed to stop work? Because there was absolutely no barrier between work and non-work. And I think we're still living with that, where theoretically you could work all the time. And so I think we have to, again, set boundaries and clarity about what is expected. And I think also set boundaries around talking about burnout and talking about feelings and emotions and mental health in the workplace. A phrase I'm hearing a lot now is mental health first aid. So you as a manager don't have to be a therapist. That's not your job. It might not be in your skill set or your comfort, but you have to know where to refer somebody who might need it. And so I think letting people know these are the expectations around work hours. These are the expectations around answering email or phone calls from home. These are the expectations if you go on a work trip about when to turn off. I think we've left that up to people's own devices, and that's not really working anymore. So again, I think the more clear we can be, the better. I don't love that it's up to every individual to set their own boundaries, because some of us just aren't good at that. So just like you said about unlimited vacation, unlimited work isn't really helpful for anybody. And I think for the of work itself, you've got to give people time off. People have to take their vacation. People have to take breaks. And if we don't, I think the results just are not what we need them to be.
Yeah. I was laughing. I was telling Tim last night, hey, sister, she got married on Saturday and Sunday night slacked me. Hey, I know you're on the road. I know you're doing this. Riley, no, I don't even want to hear from you until Wednesday when we're meeting. And I thought she should have took more time, but yeah, it's the same thing. I'm like, why are you slacking me right now? It's whatever, 8 o'clock at night on a Sunday, the day after you got married. I'm like, no, go, don't think about this. So as we wrap up, curious, what's the most valuable lesson you've personally learned from someone of a different generation, and how has it influenced your approach?
The best multi-generational experience I ever had was the very first boss I had. I was really lucky. I was interning at a nonprofit, and she wanted to teach me how to fundraise, because asking people for money is really hard, and I was really nervous about it. And she said, you can't learn it in a book. You can't learn it by sitting in training class. Come sit in my office next to me and listen to me make fundraising calls. And that openness to let me just watch her work was such a simple move, but it was so powerful. It reminded me of what apprenticeship must have been like for blacksmiths hundreds of years ago. But I think sometimes, either as older or more experienced professionals, we wall ourselves off or we don't welcome people in. She just said, hey, come hang out with me, right? Come be in my space. Come watch me do what I do. And I feel like that was the best lesson I ever got. So the more that experienced leaders can just say to young people, come hang out with me, right? I'm a real person. Here are the mistakes I made. I'm not going to be perfect. That was so valuable to me, and I'm grateful to Fran Pastore forever for doing that to me, and I try to do that as well. I think we think people are perfect or they didn't make the same mistakes that we did, and everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's getting all of this right, but if we're open about that, I think there's a lot to learn.
Making mistakes, failing, you're trying, you're taking a risk. I think I was reading very briefly, obviously COVID just destroyed your business and speaking, and so then you've got to figure out, okay, how do I bring this back? And it's going to take some change and some heartache. I'm sure you cried several times.
I did.
Yeah, no, thank you for the vulnerability. But like just having those, just going through that process and having mentors and is what makes the journey fun. Thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate the time.
This was such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Lindsey.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Joe Tossi from TechTables.com, and you're listening to the Public Sector Show by TechTables. This podcast features human-centric stories from public sector CIOs, CISOs, and technology leaders across federal, state, city, county, and higher education. You'll gain valuable insights into current issues and challenges faced by top leaders. Through interviews, speaking engagements, live podcast tour events, we offer you a behind-the-mic look at the opportunities top leaders are seeing today. And to make sure you never miss an episode, head over to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and hit that follow button and leave a quick rating. Just tap the number of stars that you think this show deserves.